Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Sorry, Francis.
No worries. I think I might need to be enabled to share my screen.
Okay, yeah, probably. Mhm.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay.
Let's do that. Right, has that come through okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, I'll go into, let's go into, there we go. Right, we'll start the timer now. So we'll go through this kind of overview. So just to introduce myself, I'm Francis Castro. I work for the Green Infrastructure team within the GLA's Environment Unit. I'm here today, kind of just to give an overview of Biodiversity Net Gain, kind of, and how it looks kind of strategically across London. Rosie afterwards is going to give a bit more of an in-depth kind of presentation on how it works, kind of a borough kind of level, more granular level. So as we know, kind of London is quite green. It's also blue as well. We're blessed with a lot of green open space, as well as kind of wonderful river streams, a kind of network of ponds, reservoirs, etc. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that. It's kind of to oversee and kind of help to kind of protect these, as well as to look to ways of enhancement. We've got a range of policies and strategies that sit at that London level. So we have the London Environment Strategy, the London Plan, as well as the kind of the Mayor's Transport Strategies. These are all the kind of strategic kind of documents that we have that over London. So in the London Plan in particular, of interest to us here today is Chapter 8 on green infrastructure and natural environment. Got a range of policies there that look within particular kind of spaces. With interest to us within this conversation today, policy G5 on urban greening and policy G6 biodiversity and access to nature in particular, but a lot of the other policies are cross-cutting as well. So they're good. There's really good stuff there. And in terms of London's planning framework, as we can see, the London Plan does help to influence all of the 33 local plans that cover the kind of 33 boroughs, local authorities that London has. And also in terms of the flow of documents from the London level down to the local level, those plans that are set at that London level help to influence those kind of borough strategies, as well as those borough operational plans or action plans, as we like to see. So where does biodiversity net gain fit into this? So if we look at national policy regulations and guidance, we can see within the Environment Act 2021, biodiversity net gain kind of like is ringed to the left there of the screen. So as you can see, mandatory net gain has been something that's been put in through the Act and is due to kind of land with us, mandatory biodiversity net gain this month. Is to note that it has been in the national planning policy framework since I think around 2012 as an option, but in terms of its mandatory application, that will come into place this month. So just a briefly overview in terms of what net gain looks like. So looking at it, 10% biodiversity net gain is the mandatory requirement from February 2024. It's a good thing to note, kind of a point to note, that 10% net gain from a site with a low ecological baseline may offer not much in terms of results, especially sites with a zero ecological baseline, which there could be some. For urban sites, particularly in London, redeveloping existing buildings may not produce the results that we might think as well. Where the gains are probably likely to happen is where development happens on green spaces or spaces with good habitat, which is something that, ideally we'd like to kind of steer away from or kind of try not to do. But we do have other options within the London framework, and one of them is the urban greening factor. So policy G5, urban greening, there is London Plan guidance that on this. And the reason I mention this here is the urban greening factor does give another option, especially where you're dealing with kind of applications or development where there is potentially a zero baseline in relation, or kind of a low baseline in terms of ecology. The UGF does give you the ability to lever some high quality green space, which also can lever kind of biodiverse planting and kind of habitat creation as well, if done well. So in relation to BNG, we're looking, kind of both these policies are in place to complement each other. Where baseline biodiversity is low, UGF can help deliver much more biodiversity net gain, but also where in certain circumstances, BNG can be very effective as well. So that's the end of my slides in terms of the overview. I hope that was kind of useful to kind of set the scene. Hopefully Rosie's presentation is going to go into a little bit more detail at the kind of borough level. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. And hope that was interesting. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that was really, really helpful. Thank you. Thanks very much for coming and for talking to us today. Okay, Rosie, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And thanks, Francis, for giving that sort of London-wide perspective, because I think it's really useful just to sort of understand where it's coming from, and to understand the sort of the bigger picture around urban greening factor, which, as Francis says, has actually a huge amount to play in delivering much greener developments in more urban locations, because that's more likely to deliver the gains. So my presentation, I'll crack on to that. It's let me just get the first slide up. And just to say, really, from my perspective, so also, Laura, can I just make sure that you keep me informed of the time, because I might, if I'm running over, or you think I've got about, let me just check how many slides I've got actually. Hold on a second. Oh, sorry, that's not the right presentation. Hold on a second. That's a good start. So I've got I've got 14 slides, but there's quite a lot of information on each of those slides. So it just gives you an idea of kind of how much time we have. Just really Laura asked me to do this presentation off the back of my community work that I do in Newham, rather than my work that I do in Sutton. I just think that's kind of just useful to know, because I think I see it from the two perspectives. So I'm involved in a community garden, and I obviously sort of am quite keen to see improvements happen in the local area. And so I think I'm sure there's a few people here tonight who would also be quite keen to understand how they can also improve their area and their local green spaces. So I'm sort of trying to focus the presentation on that kind of perspective, rather than it being a sort of the BNG council focus, or the development or the planning process, which I think is really technical, and not necessarily very easy for people to understand. I don't think I understand it enough myself, so it's very hard to then present it to other people. Can I just double check you can see my presentation? Sorry, that's right at the beginning. Sorry, right at the end. Sorry.
Not at the moment.
Sorry, hold on. Let's do that. Actually, no, I need to share my screen, don't I? That'd be useful. Get it right. Yeah, there you go. Get in there.
There we go.
Fine, good. Right, so slideshow start. Cool, can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fab. Sorry for that slight error. So biodiversity net gain, taken from the perspective you know, the people that are here tonight. So, you know, the community benefit, the nature benefit, and also how you can help councils kind of recognize the importance of enhancing those your local sites, and how you can use BNG, Biodiversity Net Gain, sorry, to sort of lever that. Yeah, so you are the eyes and ears for the council at the local level. So obviously you have you know, you really want to see benefit, and that's really where you know, BNG hopefully can do that for us. What is Biodiversity Net Gain? Well, it's a lot of things actually. It's an approach. It's been an approach that's been refined over the last 5 years by DEFRA and Natural England. It's got a very detailed methodology that determines how you assess ecological value on a site. And it uses a metric calculator to do that. So it's quite numbers focused for those people out there who are good at maths. You know, you might really want to crack on and get one of these metrics and see what it says. And it actually uses habitats as a proxy for biodiversity. So what does that mean? It means that, you know, species are important. So, you know, protected species and bats and invertebrates, but actually through this approach, it doesn't consider that as a way of assessing value. It uses only habitats. So it is seen as an additional kind of tool to understand the value of a site. So it's quite important sort of separation. It's new legislation, very new legislation, that aims really to leave biodiversity in a better state than before the development was there. And that is done through securing on-site and potentially off-site habitat, and to manage that habitat for a 30-year period, which again is a huge amount of information, and it requires a huge amount of infrastructure to manage and make that happen. So that is, in a nutshell, is what it is, and it's going to become mandatory on the 12th of February. So everyone is either really excited or really scared or somewhere in the middle, because it is onerous, and there's lots of things that particularly councils are having to get their heads around, because it requires quite a lot of changes through the planning process to be implemented. And I would probably say that, you know, in terms of the councils in London, there is, you know, everyone is in a slightly different situation because of various different factors. So there's some really key information in the .gov.uk website, which, you know, you can. It's very good. It's very easy reading, but there's a lot of reading to do. So if anyone was here who was particularly interested, you could look at that. But in terms of the councils and how the councils are working it through, they're all at different stages. And from a different perspective, so Biodiversity Net Gain also means that it's this is a quote from Sutton's biodiversity officer, you know, which is the destruction or modification of habitats now and the promise or prediction of bigger and better ones in the future. And I think that's really key because obviously, you know, we all know how much work it takes in terms of habitat creation, habitat management, you know, the time, the effort, the skills to monitor and make this possible. You know, a mature tree, if you predict that the tree will get a certain size in 30 years' time, you need to maintain it and you need to manage it and you need to put in monitoring and checks to make sure it is delivering, you know, what you intended it, you know, to be. And that's the same with every single habitat that this metric and this approach requires from developers and of councils to monitor and enforce it. So it's no easy feat. And as I said, the legislation is there to set that all out. But that legislation has only been kind of formalized more recently in I think it was in January, the secondary legislation came out. So a lot of this is still being learned and still working. Councils are still trying to work out exactly what it means to that for them. So as I said, the biodiversity net gain approach uses habitats as the proxy. So what does that mean? It means that on a site, whatever habitats are located on that site is what is measured. So, for example, if you have, on the left, you've got a habitat which is a meadow, that's considered to be a high distinctiveness. So, distinctiveness means, species rich, sort of linked to, if people know here, the priority habitats. So the habitats of principal importance in London or England. So, up lowland calcareous grassland or acid grassland or wetlands, reed bed, ancient woodland, those sorts of, those species, those habitats we know are really ecologically valuable because they have lots of wildflowers and, they're great habitat for lots of declining species. And then on the right hand side, the low distinctiveness or the which is, your improved grassland, your amenity or intensively managed habitats. And then they also have another category called condition. So you can have a high quality habitat, but it's in poor condition. And that's to do with, the presence of invasive species, compaction, presence of invasive species like, even cats or, those sorts of things. So it's quite a technical process, and you need to be quite an experienced ecologist to be able to assess it. And you need up-to-date information about the site. And likewise, another example of woodland and the right is what we know very well in parks is, the classic scattered trees and very intensively managed grassland, is the sort of low distinctiveness, poor condition, as opposed to the ancient woodland with, bluebells and, good habitat structure on the left-hand side. So, so understanding habitats, understanding plant species, is really key to understanding the value of a site. And there is a very detailed, the methodology that they use is called UKHAB. And I've just put, if you go to the ukhab.org website, you can get you can download a methodology to understand those habitats. So if you're where do the habitats go? So, for example, there's essentially three scenarios. Ideally, the habitats will be on site. That's kind of where, that's generally the preferred option because you're essentially avoiding or minimizing impact and protecting the high quality habitat. But in some cases, that's not possible. But this is the preference. But in some cases, it might not be ideal. And in some cases, it could be actually quite onerous. So in certain situations, it might not be suitable. And this sort of situation might be of interest to people on the call who comment on planning applications. So, from the 12th of February, every major development has to consider biodiversity net gain and has to provide a statement and a net gain calculator for every planning application. So, you can be asking for this because it is what they need to provide. And the information has to be reasonable quality for the councils to be able to understand if, a net gain of 10% is possible. But there is other options, and this is just the reality of, making it a practical process, which is there has to be an offset option. So in the context of Sutton, for us, that would be ideally in the borough, and it could actually be quite close or quite far from that site, which has the loss, which is where I think there could be some, potential complications, because obviously from a community point of view, you really want it to be very close to where the loss is, because otherwise you're losing out. But there are some benefits for putting it further away, which is what the map on the right shows, which is the very first beginnings of Sutton's local nature recovery strategy, which is highlighting, that sync net, the sites of importance of nature conservation, the network of ecological corridors and habitats that nature needs to survive. So whilst we might lose out, nature would probably benefit better if we were able to connect up and fill some of those gaps where biodiversity can't, or nature can't move because of all the roads in the way. But also we don't want it to go really far away, and I'll go into it in a bit more detail later. But it could potentially, because of the way that the legislation currently stands, is that it could go to Croydon, or it could go to Merton, or it could even go to Surrey. It just depends on market forces and kind of what the council is getting their policies in place to be able to avoid that from happening. And I think that's really critical from your perspective or our perspective, because that really doesn't feel right. And ultimately, the councils will lose out on money and habitat if that happens. And then finally, there's the where do the gains go? Sorry, that's the title. Sorry. The final option is statutory credits, which is probably the worst scenario, because they go somewhere far, far away and we don't know where they go. And that's something that the government has set up as a kind of backstop last resort, in case there isn't any available locations nearby to the site that can become offset habitat. And this will be really
biodiversity.
And this would be, well, yeah, it's basically they're priced highly, so to avoid developers from going for the easy option. But when I say high, I mean they're sort of 30,000-40,000 a hectare. But actually, in the scheme of things, that might not actually be that high. To give you an example, Sutton currently values biodiversity quite highly in our borough, and actually has, sort of something like 90,000 for some habitat creation costs, because of the costs and the contingencies that need to be embedded into it. So it can be quite a numbers game, which is probably a bit too much for Tuesday evening. So if I may just sort of try and work out a little bit about what might be of interest from your perspective, the community, and that is obviously the investment in parks and green spaces, because that's really key, and it requires a lot of time and effort to find funds to invest in, or get money to create new habitats, hedgerows and ponds and such like. I guess also as well is the importance of involvement in local decision making. You want to be involved in what happens locally, and councils are there to sort of facilitate that. From what I hear from Dawn Fielding, again from Sutton, she's been involved a lot with helping to provide training, and there's obviously opportunities around Biodiversity Net Gain, where training with nature, learning more about nature, learning more about habitats, learning new skills, around habitat monitoring could be really interesting, and something that some of you might be keen to know more about. And then obviously just general more opportunities to get involved with perhaps some of the more strategic aspects of B&G, such as the landowner, offset opportunities. So I kind of wanted to go into a bit more detail around B&G, the offsite environment, because that's, I think, really the key area that I think you're possibly most interested in. And I've described it as some of the details, because, as I said, there's a lot of details and not all of it can be summarized in 5 minutes. But those Croydon Friends of Group got in touch with me asked two questions, which I thought I would just try and sort of explain here. The first question being, who decides where the gains go? And I think it's just really important to explain at the moment, it really isn't currently in a good situation, because where they will go will be dependent on market forces. So ultimately, what DEFRA has done with BNG is to make a financial system around selling nature. And that sounds pretty horrendous, but actually it could be positive if it's done well. The devil's in the detail, obviously. But if you had a developer in Sutton, for example, and they needed to create offset, they needed an offset site. If there's no offset site available, or if it's very expensive in Sutton, then they might go to Surrey to deliver that offset. And the only way they can keep it in Sutton is if the council put in place, a local approach or a policy approach that dictates or not dictates, because you can't really do that, but puts more emphasis on habitats being created on site or in the local borough. So yeah, cost of habitat creation, it might be cheaper to go elsewhere. There might not be any offset sites available in Sutton, because they need to be set up and they need to be managed, and there's some legal requirements that need to go into that, and the land that might be available might be private, and so there might not be any access to them. The second question was, will there be any collaboration with parks and planners? And ultimately there should be, and there will be, but it depends a bit on the council and where they are in that process. So as I was saying earlier, everyone's just trying to understand what they need to do, and that's not necessarily very easy when most councils expertise in-house. So councils can become a habitat provider. They can create habitat banks on their land, but it does require an element of setup, surveying that land, having ecological understanding of what the habitat is, making an assessment using the metric, determining the costs of habitat creation, and then registering the site on a public platform called the Biodiversity Net Gain National Gain Site Register, which hasn't been created yet. So you can see there's quite a lot of work, but yet we're still waiting for final details of the legislation. So that doesn't make life very easy for anyone. But this is a really key aspect. The council should really try and really work out how they can do this, because otherwise, as I said before, the money will go out of the borough, and no one wants to see that. Councils can become what's called a responsible body, and that means they will be able to manage and monitor habitats like they have probably been doing. Well, I know in Sutton they've been doing it for years, to ensure they are the conditions of these habitats are doing what we want them to. But unfortunately, through the legislation, they're not able to do that on their own land in relation to habitat offsetting. It's because from a legal point of view, they can't monitor them themselves. So they need to partner with an adjacent borough, or they need to partner with another third-party company or charity or someone else. So that again creates confusion and conflict when it's not a straightforward process. But if you're interested, Plymouth and Buckinghamshire are very well prepared councils. So if you're interested in what they've done or how they're doing their BNG readiness, then they're good to have a look at. And I guess I just wanted to, I've just got two more slides, I think. Just go to this one first. So what could offsetting habitats look like? So this is a zoomed in image of Bellington Park in Sutton, just as a kind of an example of what could be done at a local level. this is just a Google map that's been sort of digitized just to highlight areas that could be enhanced within a green space. So the different colors just mean sort of different parcels of land that have been highlighted for different types of habitat enhancement. But you can also see that, some hedges. So the red lines are hedges that have been suggested to sort of, connect better between patches of habitat that go through more amenity grassland. And it might be that this is what can be done in other council areas or you could do it yourself. You could highlight areas within your parks or your open spaces that you visit and see what could be done, or where you think some enhancements would be really great to see. But so to go back to the sort of final slide, really, is really to sort of highlight, I guess, the complexities that BNG have put upon councils at this moment in time. There's a lot for them to work through, but you've got an opportunity to sort of help them kind of get through that process by telling or alerting the local ward councillors, that you really want to see habitats being enhanced and created locally, and that you really encourage and want to see that happening, to sort of try and get that momentum strategically within local authorities to happen. I think it does need everyone to sort of to say that, because it's not on people's radar. And I think, for all the 5 years that we've known about BNG, hardly anyone knows about BNG outside of the industry. So if this is all new to you tonight, don't feel like, it's unfortunate that it's so complicated, and it's taken this long to get some of this information in front of you. I also encourage that if you Googled BNG, there's quite a lot of webinars and information out there, but perhaps in particular of use could be the one that we produced, myself and David from Sutton did for the London Natural History Society back in 2022. We can give you a link. It sort of sets out more about BNG, but it also sort of comes from a more kind of from a similar perspective as this presentation. Help your local councils highlight areas of land in parks and open spaces that, from your perspective, you'd like enhanced. So there's a huge reason for this, because from the council's point of view, and certainly from my colleagues' point of view, we can only do so much, but we obviously need engagement. We also need the community buy-in. So if you identify and highlight places that you think would be great, to be enhanced, then that will really help the agenda move up the scale, and help them realize, actually could go here, or there's potential, to enhance this park instead of another area. So do be vocal, I think I would say, but in a nice, kind way, because councils are stretched. But I would really encourage that, because otherwise it's very easy for this to be a missed opportunity, at least in the short term. And then I guess the last question is really, there's real opportunities for learning more in this arena, so have a think, and Giggle and London Wildlife Trust would be interested to know, I'm sure, about any training or information you would like to have or would benefit from, to help you get more involved in this process. That might be learning more about habitats and species, or it might be understanding the planning process and what BNG requires from developers, so you can make sure that you can push them at that local level if you're commenting on developers' plans locally. Or you might be interested in looking at habitat and keeping an eye on habitat and seeing how it's going, and making sure it is actually being delivered to the quality that's needed, based on habitat management plans. So it's really open to you to ask us questions, really. And that's the end of my slides.
Thank you so much, Rosie. That was really interesting. I just wanted to pick up on something on the last slide before we open up to so put your hands up when if you have a question you want to ask. But while people are doing that, when you mentioned emailing your ward councillors, what sort of awareness do you think ward councillors have of BNG at the moment? Is it something that they're very aware of, or do they need training themselves?
Yeah, I don't think they know anything, to be honest. It's a really honest opinion. I mean, I don't know, obviously, across the whole London, but I just have a sense that it's hardly likely to be on anyone's radar unless the council has done some serious internal discussions. And I think the only one I can think of is Buckinghamshire, because they've been doing it for 2 years. I think it's still very unknown. I think it's really technical. I mean, it's hard for us to even understand it, let alone anyone else. I don't think it's helped because ecologists have made it complicated. So yeah, I think you'll probably get a lot of blank faces, and I tend to do that when I mention my job title. Yeah. I think it'd be good just to raise it, say, do you know what biodiversity net gain is? Do you know the importance of it to ensuring, we get, we invest in our green spaces rather than that money going elsewhere? I think it would help.
Yeah. And I'll be sure to, if you could send me the link to the other video, then maybe people could have that on hand in case their ward councillors are asking questions about, what does this mean and all that kind of thing. Right, so over to questions. So Malcolm, I think you were the first one to put your hand up.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm just trying to see if I can turn the screen on. Yeah, there it is. Rosa, I think it's really interesting presentation. I mean, I think there's a lot of concerns about BNG as a metric, because as you say, it doesn't really take account of species at all. And a lot of the work that's done in looking after wildlife areas is to protect particular species. And sometimes they do coincide with good habitat, but quite often you can get rare species in areas that don't necessarily going to score that very high in habitat terms. And I suspect there's very differential skill sets in different councils and as to how they're going to be able to cope with planning applications coming in. What would your advice be to people like us as sort of informed amateurs that are trying to keep an eye on the system and see if it's working? I mean, what should we be looking out for and trying to hold councils to account in the way that they're operating this system?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there should be always an ecology report for any site that's going to affect vegetation. I mean, with the mandatory BNG, it's any vegetation, any loss of vegetation greater than 25 meters. So that's very small. So I mean, there are some exemptions. Householders are not they don't need to, but any major developments from the 12th, and then minor developments from April the 6th, I think it is. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends a bit on how much time you have, because you can review ecology reports and sort of if you've got some expertise yourself, you can query what's been said if you don't think it's appropriate or they think you've missed something out. So that could be ways. I mean, that's really helpful in terms of when you do put in comments like that, because I know from looking at comments for planning applications that local knowledge is really helpful. But yeah, I mean, I guess highlighting if there isn't a report is a good approach, because then you're helping them realize that the sort of basic requirements aren't being met. I mean, there should be again, you know, policy. I mean, if you reference the policies, it's really important as well for your local council. So they all should say, you know, protecting biodiversity and enhancing. And there is now a much more strengthened NERC Act, which is the biodiversity duty that councils have. So they're all things to sort of push them in the right direction. But yeah, not an easy one to answer, I'm afraid.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anna Redman, I think you're next.
Hey, Rosie. Thanks
Hi.
so much for your great presentation. I was just wondering again on this question of planning. You were mentioning the fact of, you know, pushing back if it's not a kind of good quality report as well. And I was wondering, so if there's no report, but what are some indicators of a good quality report or not? And then another question I had was, because we've got a site that went under planning and hasn't gone through yet, but we've been told that they want to apply again, so they should come under Biodiversity Net Gain. Under the previous one, they were due to do S106 money. I was wondering how it relates to S106 money as well. Should it be on top of the S106 money?
Yeah, that I'm not quite sure I understand the second part of your question. The first question about pushback, or yeah, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really know. I guess it depends a little bit on your councils and how, you know, engaged they are, and you know, and who's. I think you just have to do it through the formal way of a comment. I think if you can have a coordinated comment rather than it being individual, I think that really helps. So a friends of group probably has more weight than an individual comment, and particularly if you do it in a way that's sort of objective rather than subjective, because it's, you know, and setting out, you know, the policies and the fact that, you know, there's a duty to have, you know, a report, a BNG assessment or a preliminary ecological appraisal, and that's, if that's not there, then but in terms of, yeah, that whether it's a good quality report, yeah, I guess it's, I think ultimately it's down to consistency. We get a lot of reports that are very basic. I think the good one is if you have a look at the map, the habitat map that comes with it, you know, if it's really, really basic and very high level, you know, like, you know, even if it's a garden, it still needs to be mapped well. So I think a report looks like it's being written well, or it doesn't, just by how it's structured. I think you can, yeah. So I think those sorts of things can help. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that's all I can really say. But the section 106 question, can you just repeat that?
So it was because they're going to chop down a bunch of trees, like 100 trees, and as part of that, there was section 106 money that was meant to be pushed towards the local, it's a local nature reserve, to the local nature reserve. And so I was just wondering if with this, that would kind of supplement this, as this would fall under Biodiversity Net Gain, or whether there would be a kind of complement that would be additional to what they had done previously. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's that. Yeah, not sure. It looks a bit complicated. I think in terms of, it sounds like it's an offset into a nature reserve as a result of the loss of those trees. And I guess ultimately, you know, that should be worst case, because you know, we want to try and avoid. That sounds like a lot of trees. So this is where I guess, you know, that scrutiny internally is really key to say, well, you know, is that really necessary? But if it is, then yes, it's that that has to be offset. Yeah, I think that's a bit complicated to kind of talk about now, unfortunately.
No, thanks.
Call me separately, Anna.
Cheers.
Great, thank you. Jerry, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you. And Rosie, thanks very much for that presentation. To be honest, I'm really struggling to join the dots between a developer's duty to achieve 10% biodiversity net gain, and how that relates to a local authority's plans to enhance and connect its and improve its green spaces. So, for example, I live in Hackney, and Hackney, like a lot of boroughs, has a local nature recovery plan and a green infrastructure strategy. Part of that is about creating meadows on its parks and other green spaces. As your slide showed, we all know that meadows are far more biodiverse, both in terms of the plant species and the insect species and other species that live within it, than the mown grass, the amenity grass around it, as I say, your slide showed. Hackney Councils has been creating meadows on its parks for many years and will continue to do so as part of its local nature recovery plan. I'm involved working with them on a pollinator corridor project, which includes creating wildflower meadows.
Can I just
yeah
just mindful of time, and other people have their hands up. So you're right, in the sense of it doesn't have to mean anything. So in a place like Hackney, most of the sites actually could be quite low in their baseline value. So if you've got 100% hard standing, it's very easy to deliver massive biodiversity net gain, like 100% net gain on site. So it's very easy. So in that sense, a developer won't need any offset habitat, which is a good thing, because we need that green space on site. We need much more greening of public realm and streets and in a new development. I guess what might happen is that if you had a development on the edge of Hackney, or in some areas, it could be that those habitats where you've got existing vegetation on site, it might be less easy to deliver a 10% net gain, and that's where offsetting might happen. Or it might be a design change. It doesn't have to be offset, but it's just that it might happen in that way. I guess from a kind of friends of group perspective, it's just making sure that habitat is able to be delivered on site, rather than not on site, in the borough, as opposed to away from the borough. Because there's a lot of money that's coming out of BNG. It sounds awful, doesn't it? Because that's all to do with offsetting. But ultimately that's going to happen, because some of the sites are going to be that way. But yeah, development won't necessarily change anything for urban parts of the borough. I hope that answers your question.
Just for two very quick ones. I know we've got other people. Are you saying then that a developer may have to give funds, as similar as in Section 106, to create habitat enhancements or could do in parks in the borough? And how on earth is that then related to the 10% net gain that has to be achieved with the site?
So 10% net gain is sometimes hard to deliver, because if you have lots of habitat on site, 10% is actually quite a substantial amount. And if they can't deliver it on site, they have to deliver it off site. So that's where the relationship is. It's like the mitigation. It's a second option if you can't deliver it on site. Yeah. So yeah, so I didn't quite remember the question.
So the first one was about, so do they give a pot of money in order to deliver habitat enhancement projects elsewhere, as with Section 106 does?
Yes, it does. So it would be secured through a Section 106 agreement, and then to deliver it off-site, you'd have to have a conservation covenants or a Section 106 agreement to deliver that habitat off-site. Yeah, that all needs to be set up.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Victoria, I think you're next.
Hi everyone, thanks Rosie for a brilliant overview. I'm with Green Space Information for Greater London, so just a quick kind of intro into how we can support that. So we're very keen to work with friends groups to develop basically some kind of portal that would enable friends of groups to participate in monitoring of these offsite sites. It's very early days, but we're very interested in getting your ideas, like kind of co-designing it with people who are actually on the ground, have the expertise, because I don't know if Rosie mentioned, but there's a 30-year monitoring requirement for these BNG sites. But there's not really any, to my knowledge, money towards that monitoring beyond that which is provided to the local authorities for, well, it's quite minimal. So I think there is this assumption that there will be a large voluntary component, and we kind of, if I'll put my email in the chat, but it would be great to kind of work with some of you on we already provide sort of community services, but things that are very particularly like pivoted to BNG, in addition to just, if you know about Giggle, nature recording is like kind of our bread and butter, but we do so much more than that. So yeah, thank you for the couple of minutes there.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that sounds great. Sean, I think you're next.
Right. Thank you. I've got a few concerns. I've seen a draft habitat bank proposal, and various alerts came up to me. I agree with you that it could be good if it's done well, but who's going to monitor the quality of these this base level setting? Who's going to ensure that ecologists are independent, the quality of ecologists who are going to do it, and what resources? I think this has been touched on. The council's going to need to do this. I know my own borough doesn't. I don't think it even has an ecologist employed. The draft proposal I saw seemed to be a developer-led, with lots of consultants, highly paid, who are going to be key movers in this. So I think there is a huge danger that this will be done by developers who are already 2 or 3 years ahead of councils in this. And I think we've got to watch very carefully what's going on. Are there any proposals that we know of for government monitoring or some independent monitoring of this? Because I think it's going to be essential.
Yeah, that's a really interesting understanding, really. I think that's possibly very true, and I think there is definitely scope here for members of the community, friends of groups, to kind of have that role, possibly. I mean, it's very, very early days, and it's everyone is learning all at the same time about how it works locally, but absolutely, there is the more eyes and ears we have at the ground level, to make sure this all works, the better it will work, and that's the same, really with, I think a lot of local authorities are getting DEFRA monies, so burden monies to deliver something locally. So there is funding available. It's just how it's being used to get ready for BNG and to make the decisions appropriate to that particular council. So there should be more resourcing happening, and consultants have a role. I mean, they're not all bad. I was once. I think they have a role in helping councils get ready for BNG and to take off some of that burden, that if they don't have necessarily all the skills in house. But absolutely, ideally, there should be someone in every borough, but it's very hard to get people at the moment. So
yes, there's going to be no machinery for independent monitoring and quality that we know of.
There will be. So there's a responsible body. Whoever comes to be a responsible body for off-site enhancements or off-site management, they will have that role of monitoring and making sure habitats are delivered to the agreed standards. And the government website has very clearly set out all the criteria that body would have to abide by to make sure they were doing a good enough job. For any habitats that are delivered on site, that is the council that has to maintain and monitor. Not maintain, apologies, just monitor that they're doing the right job, i.e., the contractors or the habitat, the contractors or the grounds maintenance people that are doing that on site. So that is a burden on the council, and that is something that councils are being encouraged to add in as a monitoring fee in the Section 106, to ensure that they don't have to pay for that over the 30-year period. So that's something that is critical to get done, because if they don't, from the 12th of February, they'll be losing money very quickly, because that's not in there at the moment.
Okay, so no independent monitoring. No, that is the point, I think.
I mean, I guess, there could be. I mean, it might be that the other organisations will do something off their own back, but no. Aside from the council, the developers, and anyone who becomes a responsible body, there is, unless I don't know, there is something. I'm not sure there is at the moment, but things might change as people highlight issues, and if you have any issues, that's really important to raise. So.
Right, thank you. I'll let others get in on this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm
Bye-bye.
aware that we've gone over time. Rosie, do you have, it looks like we've got one more hand up, and I have been noting we have questions in the chat as well. But I'm conscious of everyone's time. Could I suggest maybe we hear from Suzanne and then have questions from the chat answered in the next bulletin? Does that sound sensible?
Yeah, well, I could try and answer them now if I don't mind staying 10 minutes later just to get them done and here rather than later. That would be easier.
Brilliant, great. So Suzanne, over to you.
Well, yeah, finally, I was going to highlight Kate's question here because it covers many areas in Brent as well. That when does BNG kick in? Is it from the date that a developer buys the site? She said, near me, a developer purchased a nature-rich site that had planning permission refused because it was a sink and mole, a metropolitan open land. But since then, typically, they have been intentionally degrading the site to destroy any nature. We've seen this in Brent, and Brent are applying BNG since March. Kate, I'm not sure where she is, but it's a very key question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. There is guidance on that on the government website about the fact that they're not allowed to do that, and they've made it very clear. I don't know the exact details, but again, I could probably get that to Laura, where if a site has been degraded after I think after a certain date, then that's against that, that's illegal essentially. That's not, the thing is, it doesn't really stop it, but there is something. It should be some kind of enforcement somewhere where that situation shouldn't be happening, so yeah, that would be guidance there, and in terms of yeah, the importance of highlighting that's really key to prevent. So yeah, sorry, I wasn't quite sure what your question was, but there's, again, on the government website, there's some really clear guidance on when a development has to consider biodiversity net gain. So there's two aspects to this. If Brent, as a local policy, say they've been implementing Biodiversity Net Gain since March, then that's what applies. So that always is sort of additional local information that's really important from the development point of view. But also, yeah, so I mean, that's fundamentally the critical issue here, is that actually if they have been doing that, they need to relate to that policy guidance rather than the mandatory requirements, which will be probably, like in this case, they're less onerous to that of the Brent policy.
We've got some examples of the matrix being used even with a large garden with a second house being put in. If anybody, I think they're still viewable, if anyone would like to see some matrix. We haven't got many that I've got my hands on, but we've got some to share. One is a council estate and one is a house on garden land, so next to a large green space. If it's of any use, we can share that. And also for you, Rosie, if anything to do with the idea of what was quality and what wasn't quality, and their consultants that are being used for the Biodiversity Net Gain matrix, and then Brent are interpreting it and working on it. Key is the principal tree officer and one biodiversity officer, but not specialist trained in BNG, but he's getting there.
Great to hear.
That's good. Right, so over to just a few questions from the chat. So someone asked, do option 3 offsets have to be used in the UK?
Oh, sorry, can you just repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Do option 3 offsets have to be used in the UK? Have to be?
Yes.
UK?
No, not UK, England. It's only in England.
It's only.
It doesn't apply to Scotland or Wales at the moment. Wales has a very different qualitative approach, and Scotland is sort of still deciding what they're going to do. So yeah, only in England. But yeah, anywhere, it could be anywhere in England.
Okay, great. And then another question was, so species aren't part of the assessment, but they can be highlighted on areas that community suggest for improvement question. So can they be used on areas that community suggests for improvement?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the first bit.
So I think he's saying that, so if species aren't part of the assessment, can they be used, can they be highlighted as areas that the community suggests for improvement? So I guess pre and post, I think, is probably the question. Richard, Sylvester, are you still there? Do you want to could you maybe explain the question a bit more? I think he's.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. Let's see. Okay, just scrolling down, sorry. So somebody was asking about who to highlight to, but that was, I think we've covered that. Speak to your ward councillors. And someone was also asking if there is a biodiversity net gain officer in each borough. Like, is that a requirement?
No, it's not. It's recommended, but it's not required per se. I mean, yeah, each council, is set up, slightly differently. So in some cases, it might be, an expert or planners that will do the work, and they might sort of subconsultant the work to an ecology consultant to do planning advice. But yeah, and some will just, it won't be necessarily like a single individual person like myself, focusing on BNG. It might be that they'll take it on as their current workload, which does increase pressure internally. But yeah, it all depends.
Okay. So I think just a couple more questions. So the council can't monitor their own habitat, but that we as friends groups might be trained up to do habitat monitoring, And how do we ensure some status for community-based habitat monitoring of land for enhancement?
Sorry, can you just repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah, so he says the council cannot monitor their own habitat enhancements, but that perhaps friends groups could be involved in the habitat monitoring process in some way. And how would we ensure that we had some sort of status for our community-based habitat monitoring? Or is that not on the cards?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess it's early days, isn't it? I mean, I guess it depends a little bit on how set up your local community group is. If it's a friends of group, it's probably more likely to be like a light touch approach. So more like you know, providing sort of supplementary information, providing sort of comments, to the councils, whereas to actually manage and monitor the sites in a serious manner, you would have to be a responsible body, and that would have legal implications for delivering and maintaining monitoring those habitats. So that's quite a kind of a serious undertaking, and would be kind of a big organization or someone who had expertise. So if it's a friends of group, it's probably more likely to be a local. I mean, not to say there's not enhancements been happening in parks anyway outside of the BNG process, that will continue to happen. But in terms of large scale habitat creation, it all happened through BNG because that's where the money is coming from. So yeah, I would say, nothing. You can do habitat monitoring, absolutely, and we would love you to get involved. But it will be very much on a kind of light touch approach, I think, initially.
Do you want me to, sorry to butt in, but do you want me to just to kind of add to that as well? I mean, the point, one point to make is that the habitat monitoring that's put in place is kind of the developer is signing up to essentially a legal agreement, which for 30 years, which they have to, they or whoever that agreement's passed on to. Then here we go, the complexities of the kind of, if you like, the covenants that are put in place. But the value of groups such as yourselves and you personally is being able to know what's meant to be happening on that site over that time period, and the ability to, if there are concerns that what's meant to be delivered on that site isn't being delivered, that you raise that with the correct planning authority, and they have to take action against that. So I think Victoria kind of from Giggle was talking about this kind of like register that people could publicly access, and I think that's actually quite a kind of a useful tool for kind of community groups to be able to be aware what's going on in their local area and what's supposed to be happening all in one place. So it's worth considering that in terms of how this system develops. But yeah, it's going to be brand new. So I think it's next week it all kicks off. But yeah, local people have a really valuable role in this for sure.
Yeah, we're the ones who look at our parks the most often. I'm sorry, I say parks, but green spaces, blue spaces, we're there most days, many of us. So yeah, I think we can see when things are going well, and when maybe things need to be readjusted, and feedback on that process. So I think that's really, really useful. And also just to add as well that I think many of you will have seen that I think about a week ago I put out a call in the newsletter asking if anyone was interested in any particular topics for training, and some people came back and said some varying levels of advanced to intermediate to basic biodiversity training would be really useful. And I think that's something that we can certainly look to do to put on to help with sort of the more informal monitoring that I think we can all have a role in. So I think that's all the questions. if anyone has any burning questions after the call, then, you know, get in touch and I can hopefully try to put you in touch with someone who can help. But I just want to say thank you so much to Rosie. That was amazing. You know, I think your perspective, both from, you know, your work with Sutton Council, but also working for a community, you know, working with a community garden has been really helpful. And I've certainly learned a lot. And yeah, it's been really informative and really grateful for your you know, all your contributions today. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you also, Francis, for your talk at the beginning of the call and for your interjection just now. That was really helpful. So yeah, thanks guys, and thank you to all of you for joining as well. I hope you all found this really useful. And yeah, stay tuned. We'll be putting on more webinars. So hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Laura, for organising this. And yeah, finally did it.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Laura.
Bye.